Sir, Vidyut is ready with the recordings and all, we can start, sir.
We'll start.
Yeah,
Okay.
sir. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome you all to this ninth ROS webinar of this season, the COVID season. This one would be a bit different. We'll focus on one retina talk and then a series of slideshows. We hope to make it different this time. And I hope the time spent on this Saturday evening with us will be useful to all ophthalmologists, not only retina people. The one guest talk is our keynote address by Dr. Hitendra Mehta. And the pictures or the slide shows which 6 prominent retina surgeons will be showing would be based on general interest to all ophthalmologists in routine day-to-day practice. Dr. Suketu Bappal, our dynamic secretary of ROS and also a moderator of this meeting, would introduce the speakers as well as the topic further. Dr. Suketu, you can go ahead.
Yes, sir. Good evening, one and all. Today's guest talk will be the enigma of similarity. Does randomized control trial translate into a real world practice? And for this, we have Dr. Hitendra Mehta from Mumbai, and he will be speaking on an innovator ranibizumab versus biosimilar molecule Eccentrix from Novartis versus biosimilars. Um, it is for all of.
Yeah, the voice was breaking.
Is it okay, sir?
Yeah, now audible. Yes, go ahead. I can't hear you.
Baseline Cunningham risk factor.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
Is it okay? So I think everyone should mute themselves. Then and then it will be audible.
Yeah.
Kindly keep yourself mute. Okay, there will be some interesting diagnosis and images. There will be 6 slideshows from 6 retinal specialists, each with a different theme and some take-home messages. Lastly, ROS will award the best slideshow with a gift voucher.
The voice is breaking, Dr. Suketu.
Suketu, sir.
Yeah. On the screen, we see our 6 retina specialists who will be presenting their slideshows, all doing great retina work in Rajkot. And I'll be also a moderator in this event. We take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Hitendra Mehta. He's a prominent vitreoretinal surgeon and a fellow from Shankar Nethralaya. He owns the Infinity Eye Hospital in Mumbai. He worked at the Aditya Jyot Hospital for a long time and has many publications with Dr. Natarajan to his credit. His guest talk today would be on does RCT translate into real world practice? The the enigma of similarity between the anti-VEGF molecules. And I now invite Dr. Hitendra Mehta to take over and give his keynote address. Dr. Mehta, please share your screen.
Yeah. Is it visible to all?
Yes, sir.
So at the outset, I'd like to thank the office bearers of Rajkot Ophthalmic Society and Novartis for having me on this Saturday evening for a retina meeting. So my talk today is the enigma of similarity. Does randomized controlled trial translate into real world practice? So basically the presentation is divided into three parts. First part will be on the journey of Lucentis or Eccentrix as we use it now. The experience over the last 12, 13 years, 14 years or rather. The real world evidence with the innovator randomizumab, that is Eccentrix. And does choice of biosimilar really influence the final outcome? So first let's go to the journey of Lucentis Eccentrix. So up to 2006, the only treatment that was available, I mean, I came back from my fellowship in 2003 to Mumbai, and from 3 to 6, the only treatment that we were offering was photodynamic therapy, and all of us know it had its own challenges. The aim of treatment was never to improve vision; it was to stabilize, and invariably over time, patient lost vision. There was a lot of scarring. The laser had its own issues. So of course, once you were diagnosed with AMD, you had the patient having a lot of anxiety, confusion. What is going to happen next? Till the advent of Lucentis, that as it was known then for India also, in 2006. So this was an anti-VEGF agent which was specifically designed for intraocular use. It was slowly eliminated from the eye after of 9 days, but rapidly cleared from the systemic circulation, thus by causing no side effects systemically. And then since then, it reduced the incidence of blindness as was started getting reported across the world. The early gains that were achieved by the use of Lucentis were maintained if the patient was maintained on treatment, and this has now come up from many studies. Whether there were studies for AMD, there were studies for diabetic macular edema, the venous occlusions, and myopic CNV. So the long-term results were maintained as per all the randomized controlled trials. So this is just a slide on the evolution of Lucentis. Approvals for AMD, neovascular AMD in 2006, then the occlusions for vascular disease, that is venous occlusions and DME in 2011, for myopic CNV in 14, and finally for ROP in 2020. Now, Lucentis or Eccentrix is the most extensively studied anti-VEGF that has been used clinically for 13 years. More than 500 clinical studies, 4.3 million patient years. Patient year means number of patients multiplied by the years of follow-up that they had as per whatever data is available. It's the only anti-VEGF today that is approved for all 6 indications: neovascular AMD, diabetic macular edema, branch retinal vein occlusion, central retinal vein occlusions, myopic CNV, and retinopathy of prematurity. So it has a well-defined efficacy safety profile. You have more than 10 years of data available, multiple number of studies, more than 71,000 patients enrolled in trials, 4.3 million years of patient use. Now, the next part of this presentation is, once we've seen the journey of Lucentis in brief, is what is RCT and what are real world studies. So randomized controlled trials, as all the studies for Lucentis, some of the names were just there in the previous slides. They are interventional study, they compare the data. There will be a well-defined patient criteria that will be included. You will have good patient adherence because patients have been told they are enrolled in the trial, they'll follow up properly, they'll comply properly. And then at the end of it, you assess the safety of the drug, assess the efficacy of the drug, and you come out with the results. In real world study, it is a little different. It is non-interventional. It just generally represents the broader population, what we will see in our day-to-day practice. So once you have, in a real world studies, you can get the information from your RCT and optimize it to your patient outcome, improve the quality and care to delivery of care to the patient, and the decision makers, that is the healthcare practitioners, the patient, the authorities, the insurance companies, they can be informed before because you already have the trials. Now, Luminous was one of the largest prospective observational study in medical retina. Very big study, more than 30,000 patients across 42 countries, close to 488 sites. And this is the map of all the countries where the cases were recruited from. So it was a global 5-year multicentric observational study across all approved indications to evaluate the long-term effectiveness, safety, and treatment patterns associated with ranibizumab 0.5 milligram, that is Lucentis or Excentrix, in our routine clinical practice. The next few slides basically will just be explaining the results that came from the Luminous study. So the first slide is on neovascular AMD. Sorry. Yeah. So the first slide is on neovascular AMD. Now the first graph, the patients who had to start with 10 letters of vision on the ETDRS chart, they improved to 23 letters. This is over a 1 year's follow-up. Patients who had 33 letters, so that means they had a little better vision, they improved to 40 letters, close to 40 letters. Patient who had better vision than that, to start with, they had 50 letters of vision. They improved to 54 letters. Patient who had 65.5, they almost maintained and they were at 66. And patient who had very good vision, who had 78 letters to start with, had lost just 3 letters after a year follow-up. So this was the result that was there in the Luminous study, in the real world data. Now, when it came to DME, the results were very similar. Patients who had very poor vision, that is, who had started with only 9 letters, they reached to 22 letters. And the other results are very similar. Patient who had 33 letters, they reached to 42. Patient who had 51, they reached to 56, and so on. And patient who had very good vision lost just 2 letters on ETDRS chart. BRP was even better. Patient who had very poor vision, 8.2 letters to start with, they reached close to 40 letters after 1 year of treatment on Lucentis. And similarly, the other things. And similar thing was seen in CRVO and in myopic CNVM. So patient who had very poor vision, they improved reasonably. Who had a little better vision, improved a little better. Patient who had very good vision, almost all of them maintained on a 1 year follow-up. So the evidence that we had got from the randomized control trial, they were in synchronization with what came from the real world data of the Luminous trial. That is what these slides were saying. Some results had come from the RCTs, and then when they did the real world data and the real world data collection of thousands of patients, they found that what they got in the randomized control trial was very similar to what they finally found in the real world data. Now, last part of the presentation is on the biosimilar. Now, to understand that, first we need to know what is a biologic and what is a biosimilar. So a biosimilar is a biologic product that is highly similar to and has no clinical meaningful difference from an existing FDA approved reference product. So here you have a biologic called Lucentis or Excentrix, ranibizumab, and then there are other companies which come up with a products such as vaccines, blood and blood components, and recombinant therapeutic proteins that are used to prevent, treat, or cure a disease. Now, there will be a lot of manufacturing standards that will be there to prepare a biologic. A biosimilar is a biopharmaceutical drug designed to have active properties which are similar to one that has been licensed. So, as the molecule gets amplified, even if a small structural difference comes right in the beginning of the cycle that they make, it can get amplified later on and cause differences in the final product. So let us understand that a biosimilar is similar. It is not identical. That's why the word is biosimilar. The size and the complexity of the protein is such that it is virtually impossible to make an exact copy, and hence the word similar. So the major concern is that, even a small difference that may come later on can cause unexpected problems in terms of safety and efficacy. Now, when it comes to manufacturing of a biosimilar, a lot of information is required. So the manufacturing company which is making the biosimilar and trying to copy it from the biologic, they will know the basic DNA sequence that the original biosimilar had used. But what they will not know, because that data is not released by the innovator company because it does not suit them commercially, the biologic company, the biosimilar company will never know what was the original cell line used, the growth media used, the method of cell expansion, the bioreactor conditions, the protein recovery conditions, the purification conditions, formulation methods, the reagents used. And hence, this is something that they will learn over time, over years and years on trial and error basis. So now, see, this slide is showing how complex it is and difficult it is to make a biosimilar. So like say something like a aspirin, it has got 21 atoms. You want to make a generic, you can make an exact 100% replica and copy of that, because it's like making a bicycle with 150 parts. Of course, it can be duplicated. It can be replicated in all ways. But a biologic is an extremely complex molecule. It has got more than 25,000 atoms, like something like infliximab, which all our uveitis patients are taking. It's an extremely complex structure. It has got more than 6,000 carbon atoms, 9,000 hydrogen atoms, oxygen, close to 2,000 oxygen atoms, sulfur atoms. It's like making an aircraft with 6 million parts. That's why you have just one Boeing and Airbus where it's very difficult to compete with them. That's the same thing with a biosimilar. With a biologic, it's very difficult to make an exact replica of the same molecule. Now, as clinicians, when we are using some drug for, let's say, 10, 12, 13 years, and then you are given another molecule which is trying to compare, which is in the same place as the original innovator molecule. What we as clinicians need to be satisfied is there a head-to-head trial that has happened, which will ultimately help me decide, okay, this is as good as the previous one. So there was just one study between the original innovator molecule, that is Lucentis, and the biosimilar. It was just a 3-month trial. And as we all know, most of the studies have at least a 1 year. In fact, some studies have a 2-year follow-up. So the study was very short, just 3 months. The endpoint used for the study was loss of 15 letters. And most of the studies now for Lucentis are talking of gain in vision. Besides, the study had just 100 patients, with the biosimilar arm having 75 patients and the innovator molecule 25. Now, the figures were not, the number of patients were not something that will give you statistical significance when it comes to the data finally. So, was this data enough? Can we extrapolate the findings of this small study? Hello? Can I continue? Can I
Please
continue?
continue.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Audible.
Yeah. So can we extrapolate this data that we got from such a small study and extrapolate into other indications like vascular indications like DME, venous occlusion, etc., etc. Now, RENACT was one very small study that was there, but then it had not captured a lot of information on the adverse, and it has not done a lot of sub-analysis in the groups, in subgroups. Now, the first real-world evidence in India on a head-to-head comparison between the innovator Lucentis Eccentrix versus biosimilar came from a very large series that came from Disha Eye Hospital, West Bengal. Now this is really a big number because they extracted data from close to 18,000 cases from a period of 2015 to 19, and they did the trial only for 2 studies for 2 diseases, the DME and neovascular AMD. So this slide is on DME. So the aim of the study was to evaluate the change in visual acuity between the innovator ranibizumab, that is Lucentis, and the biosimilar ranibizumab in DME patients. So the number was very big actually. If you see, the innovator molecule, that is Lucentis, had 1,159 patients, and the biosimilar 464 patients. So very big number. And this was retrospective. Of course, they took out the data and then they analyzed. And if you see the improvement, so this is a logMAR vision. So if you see in the innovator, that is the Lucentis, the vision improved from 0.798 to 0.597. So there was an improvement in vision. The improvement was seen even in the biosimilar arm, but the improvement was not as significant. So the vision improvement for innovator ranibizumab is significantly better than the biosimilar arm with a p-value of less than 0.5. Now again, this is the same thing. So the improvement, logMAR improvement was in the innovator was much better than the logMAR improvement in the biosimilar. Now patients with improvement of more than 1 line. So the biosimilar had 54%, and the innovator ranibizumab, that is Lucentis Eccentrix, had 70% patients who had improvement of more than 1 line. Now, adherence to treatment. Of course, you can analyze this slide in any way, but basically when you say patients are adhering to treatment, it means that they are getting improvement. That's why they are adhering to treatment. 2 times the number of patients added to treatment when it came to the innovator versus the biosimilar. Mean number of injections. Again, the mean number of injections were more in the innovator molecule as compared to biosimilar. This was the only thing I felt that, in the entire study, the number of injections per patient I felt were very less, because at least in my practice, most patients do stick to the at least a 3 injection regimen, and then they may drop out. But the average number of patient injections here were pretty less, I felt. And a proportion of, I think somebody's audio is on. Okay, proportion of patients receiving 3 or more injections. So again, the innovator Lucentis molecule had 16% patients, 15.5% patient who took 3 or more versus only 7% patient in the biosimilar arm. Now, the second part of the study was in neovascular AMD. Again, the numbers were very big, 720 patients with eccentrics and 177 with biosimilar. So again, very, very good numbers. The objective was to evaluate the change in visual acuity of innovative drug versus a biosimilar drug in neovascular AMD. Against the adherence to treatment, 23% patients adhered to treatment, whereas only 6% adhered to treatment in the biosimilar arm. Mean number of injections 2 versus 1.6. Again, the improvement of more than 2 lines was seen in 33% of the biosimilar, but 52% of the innovator molecule. Patients with improvement of 3 or more line. Again, this is also very significant. 29% in biosimilar versus 48% in innovator. So what we get to now see that this was a real world data. Again, here the evidence suggests that what results were given to us in a very, very short, small, randomized controlled trial, they were not in synchronization with the real world evidence that came out from the study which compared the biosimilar ranibizumab with the biologic, that is Lucentis. So in a nutshell, innovator ranibizumab, that is Lucentis or eccentric as we get it, has demonstrated high efficacy and well-established safety profile across all 6 approved indications. The real-world evidence for innovator ranibizumab confirm the effectiveness and safety outcomes observed in the randomized control trials. Visual improvement is significant better with innovator as compared to the biosimilar, and patients on innovator ranibizumab has 2 times higher chance that they will adhere to treatment as compared to biosimilar, maybe because they're getting better results. Thank you.
That was a very nice presentation, and it was an eye opener actually to see that data from Disha with so many.
Yeah, it was actually, the numbers are very big, very big. I was surprised when they showed me first time. These are huge numbers actually.
Yes, in both arms, both.
Yeah.
A couple of discussion. The last point you said, that adherence to the treatment. It's surprising. Like we presume that the innovator molecule treatment would be more expensive to the patient. That is one, and the protocol probably would be the same. So how do we explain the adherence to the treatment better?
No, I mean, the only explanation could be that they were getting better results, so they stuck to the treatment. But still, if you go to see, the numbers are less. Even if you see 15%, 20% sticking to the 3-drug regimen, whereas in clinical practice, at least where I practice, I mean, when we start patients on 3-drug therapy, 3 injections therapy, they continue. Here, very few patients continued in both the arms.
Right.
So the very poor number of patients adhering to the biosimilar arm. The other way of explaining it is that the results were not good to their liking or whatever, and so they discontinued or they didn't continue the treatment. The other explanation could also be that sometimes you will have patients who go opt for a more expensive treatment. Maybe they understand the treatment better, so they may continue the treatment. I mean, there are different ways you can explain that.
Right. Because as far as I know, there is no difference in the protocols, at least between the.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But in both the arms, they got that double the number of patients adhered to the treatment here as compared to the biosimilar.
Right. Another thing I was interested was whether someone has compared head to head the structural aspects of the innovator versus biosimilar in the lab or something to show that this is different and this is why it is going to work differently. Somebody must have, or at least should have tried to do that, I suppose.
I think Shankar Nethralaya is, I think probably should come out with some data, I feel, in some time, because they have done a lot of biosimilars they have given off late. And I hopefully they will come out with data in some time.
And the other point, obviously, it is addressed to the company actually. Like, how do they ensure that of all the batches they make of the innovator molecule, it stays exactly the same? Is it the single? It is derived from the single source of the cell line or whatever they're using, and why the same does not apply to the biosimilars? Why they say that it is more variable in their structure and the product which comes out as biosimilars. So uh, that would be interesting to know why.
Hmm.
Right. So Dr. Hitendra Mehta, very nice presentation.
Thank you.
We learned a lot from that Disha data. Definitely, we'll look into it in more detail and then counsel our patients accordingly. Thank you for sparing your time on this Saturday
Thank
evening,
you.
and please stay on so that
Yeah, sure.
be a part of the judging team for the presentations to follow. Now we move on to the next section, which will be an interesting slideshow presentations by 6 of our retina specialists. And we would like to start with our senior vitreoretinal surgeon, Dr. Miran Thakur. He has now almost 20 years of experience, and he would like to present his series of pictures and cases. We are eager to know what he has for us. Dr. Milan, please.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I will share my screen.
Yes, please.
Is it visible, sir?
Yes, it is on. Yes.
Thank you very much, sir. Today I'm going to show few cases of Octa, and right away I'm going to images. This patient, around 50-year-old male, presented with dimness of vision, both eyes simultaneously last 6 months, and clearly it is visible. It's ischemic inferior BRVO, and all inferior blood vessels are clear. And I just did the Octa for this patient, and right eye, left eye, half of the retina is completely avascular. Even in composite picture, we can see there is no blood vessel seen inferiorly in both the eyes. And this is the magnified view of the Octa, and the inferior half of the retina is completely avascular with collateral vessels over the disc. Now, this is case 2, simple diabetic patient. Everyone knows it's NPDR on fundus photograph with succinate retinopathy. Opacity showing the cystoid changes and mixed. And now, I was surprised to note inferior to the macula. So this is magnified view of the classic and the Octa is showing clear-cut neovascular network membrane in a capillary level, and after NT it has regressed markedly here, which is visible in both the pictures. Now this is again a case of PDR, a picture of color photograph, ABE or just temporal to the macula, and corresponding recording for also.
Sorry,
So it
slides
is
are
a
not
combination of
moving.
all three: color photo, SFA, and Octa. Again,
No, slides are not moving.
it's moving. Forward, sir. Not moving.
No,
Now
it's still on case 3.
it's moving or not?
No, not moving.
Okay. Now don't know what is happening.
Bhai, you are on mute.
Is it visible? It's moving.
Can you reshare, sir? It's not
No.
moving still.
You will have to reshare it. You will have to, Milan bhai, you will have
Mr.
to
Vidyut, can you
reshare.
help? Vidyut,
Okay. Okay, sure. Okay, sir.
I think you will have to stop sharing it and reshare it.
Yeah, stop sharing. I am restarting it.
No, because that thing is stuck there on case 3.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, now it has started. I think now you reshare. No, now it's not visible, but I think you will.
Yeah, again,
Yeah, reshare it.
okay, okay. Okay, okay, reshare it. Okay. Is it visible? Is,
No.
but it's not going.
Milan sir, I
Milan
think
sir.
one more option is to switch off your camera and then share. That might help.
Milan sir, can you reduce your bandwidth and again you can share?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's coming now.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, case 5.
Now
Is it visible, sir?
Go to case 4, I think, straight.
Okay.
Case 4.
Okay. Okay. Case
Yeah.
4.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a known case of diabetes. Again, montage color fundus photograph showing the pre-retinal hemorrhage. Fluorescein angio is showing NV temporal to the macula, and corresponding NV can be noted on Octa image also. So it is just I have kept it as a comparison: color fundus photo, FFA, and Octa. Now again, this is a case of diabetic. Color fundus photograph is showing just mild NPDR. Just nasal area of the disc also of the same I have put over here. And now the montage picture of the Octa is showing clearly lot of neovascularization elsewhere, as well as very great capillary dropout areas. And the other eye of the same patient is showing the same picture as on a montage Octa. Lot of neovascularization elsewhere. Now this is my last case. Dimness of vision since long. A lot of RP alterations. Here the fluid beneath the RP. Basically, it's a case of a chronic CSR and autofluorescence picture. This is OCT is showing fluid and the elevated PD over here. This made me suspect something additional. Something is going on behind the RP. So I did the Octa and fluorescent both. So fluorescent is showing multiple leak CSR, but at the same time Octa is showing neovascular membrane behind the RP. So my take-home message is Octa is a non-invasive diagnostic tool which helps in diagnosis of retinal vascular disease. And retinal vascular disease should not be managed only on the basis of OCT findings. Many a times fluorescein or the Octa is helpful to change your management, and it is definitely helpful when fluorescein is contraindicated, and we can avoid the side effect of fluorescein in many cases. Thank you.
Excellent. Dr. Milan, excellent
Yes,
cases, beautiful pictures, probably ideal for representing Octa or OCT angiography. Yes, your points are well taken. Now, the standard question, with the advent of
Yes, sir.
Octa, how much of your fluorescein angiography has come down? Do you think?
Almost come down. Hardly I am doing when I don't get good images over the Okta, or the patient is not cooperative, media is not clear, then if it, I feel it's very compulsory for the patient to do fluorescein, then and then I go for the fluorescein. But most of the time, I get the information on Okta.
Right.
Yeah, I'll also agree to this, because I mean I've also almost stopped invasive fluorescein totally. In fact, only very rarely, in a CSR case, where your Okta is not going to give you enough information if you want to laser the CSR. But otherwise, most things you'll be able to manage on an Okta nowadays.
Yeah, but we have to highlight one point for the general ophthalmology, that Okta will not show the leak.
Yeah,
Yes,
So if you want to
it will not
actually
show it.
look at a leak, then fluorescein angiography is still the
no, Okta will not even pick up microaneurysms because your flow is actually very slow, so it won't pick up all that.
right. And how difficult do you find to take good images of Okta in various situations? Say, vitreous haze. There is a PVD with a lot of floaters in the central vitreous cavity, and if the media is not that clear,
Yes.
uh, is it easy or how difficult is it? Use
Yeah,
OCT.
definitely. When the media is not clear, we don't get good images. So at that time, sometimes in that particular situation, fluorescence sometimes helps to get some information bypassing the media head. Particularly in steroid hyalosis, where you get very good get image in FFA, but not on the Okta.
Yeah, point well taken. Excellent presentation, Dr. Milan. Thank you. We'll now move
Thank
on
you,
to
sir.
the next presentation. That will be by Dr. Akash Patel. Can you share your screen? Dr. Akash Patel is a very prominent medical retina specialist all over Saurashtra, and he moves to a lot of places, probably 6 or 7 centers, I believe. And he has a wealth of experience, many years of doing medical retina practice. Dr. Akash, yes, you can start. You're mute. Akash, you'll have to unmute.
Good
Yes.
evening, everybody. It's a wonderful evening, and I would like to thank Dr. Mukesh Parwal sir for this very innovative idea of bringing with the retinal imaginary and Novartis Pharma people for sponsoring this event. So today I'm going to talk on smartphone focus photography technique in both adults as well as pediatrics. Luckily, I got the chance to innovate in various different forms. The issue with the classical imaging technique, as we do it on classical fundus photography, is that it use only the central portion of the retina, and peripheral portion of the retina, far extreme periphery, might often go uncaptured. If you were to invest quite huge lot of money, around 80 lakhs, then we might be able to obtain a wide field fundus imaging. But then there was a need for a low cost device. Now we are doing it all at almost zero cost in our clinics. So this technique basically helps us to capture images of not only the central fundus photo, but also the paracentral ones, the mid periphery, as well as the extreme periphery. And the peripheral retinal degenerations can often be diagnosed at zero cost. So I'm going to discuss few adult cases first. This is a case of PCV, in which you can see there is a almost the macula has gone for a toss because of the scarring due to the secondary to the IPCV. There is a hemorrhage, and this can be done. Like I say, sir mentioned that I am working in between 4 or 5 centers, and sometimes it becomes difficult for the patient to come over to the base center for a image capture. And if there is a heavy technique, then it really helps. This particular photograph would demonstrate a photic maculopathy, but one can also observe that a slight tilt of the eye, and one might able to capture a better photograph than the first one. So every tilt of the eye is very important when it comes to this imaging technique, because we don't have a pseudo automatic guided assisting as when it comes to smartphone fundus photography. It's a case of a BRVO or branch retinal vein occlusion, wherein one can see this is a vein occluded, and we have traced it to the extreme periphery. This occluded vein can be seen, and also the flame-shaped hemorrhages are present all over the sector of the retina. Even one can capture the extreme peripheral degeneration. This is a variety of degeneration by the name of snowflake degeneration, not altogether really common, but it can be more distinctly made visible by post-image processing, and one can make it red color free on the smartphone itself, and it helps to delineate the image very well. This is a case of a peripheral retinal drusen in which one can see that there are no central drusens in the macula, but the periphery is studded with the drusens, also the mid periphery as well. And this was a cataract eye. So again, sometimes imaging in cataract eye becomes a bit tricky, but here we were able to capture it on the smartphone itself. Again, it becomes very handful in the pediatric age group and especially the ROP age group, because it is difficult to make the babies sit onto the classical fundus camera. And the mobility, like I said, it is a really handy tool to carry it all along whenever you go for a ROP screen. The documentation again becomes sometimes very important, because as we know, the lawsuits in the ROP are always class action lawsuit, and sometimes one might be in real fix. And if one has an imaging technique which is really handy and cost free, then it helps to document the things in time. So this is a case of a 38-day-old preterm low birth weight twin child, in which this was a retinal hemorrhage which was non-ROP related. One can see mild dilatation and tortuosity of the blood vessels, but this is a non-ROP related hemorrhage. This is just a chance finding, but the capture from the extreme periphery again is possible with the help of smartphone. Image processing can be done, and one can create a montage as well and connect all those dots which are present from the center to the periphery and trace the blood vessels from the center to the extreme periphery of the retina. So I have been using ranibizumab, the original molecule, since the day one of the practice, because Avastin has its own set of legal complications, and just to avoid that, I have been using this. So this is a regressing case of a regressing ROP in which we have been able to capture the optic disc as well as the macula. There was vitreous haze to begin with, now that is regressing, and the ridge can be here visible, although faint, not so clear, because the problem with the babies is they keep on toggling, as we know, and we have to toggle along with them, and sometimes becomes really tricky to capture the exact pictures like we are able to do so in adults. But here we were able to capture the mature retina and immature retina and the ridge or the stage 2. So it's regressing from stage 3 to stage 2. This was the first photograph captured on this particular device, MII RetCam, because I was the first commercial user. It was around 3-4 years back, and one can it helps demonstrate the actual pathology. So here, dilated and tortuous blood vessels in ROP case is visible, and if one, especially general ophthalmologist, comes to across such a case, it becomes really important to refer them appropriately and urgently to a retina specialist. And given treatment, these vessels straighten out, and then one can treat them with laser or keep them, under wait and watch approach for, any spontaneous regression or recurrence. This is a long-term result of ROP. Again, the baby, as they get bigger, it becomes tricky to stabilize them, and I never give general anesthesia even for examination, or it would be really unethical to give them a general anesthesia for just capturing these images. So I have been the images might seem blurry, but we have been still able to capture these images in two of the kids which were treated after 1.5 years of age. Again, this is a 5-year-old kid in which we were able to, with slight cooperation and coaxing, we were able to capture right from the center, the macular drag, right from the center to the extreme periphery, and create a montage, and which we were able to demonstrate why the vision cannot improve at this present age, and why it is already too late for the patient come to us, and probably surgical attempt can be tried. This probably is one of the youngest retina snap in the world. Coincidentally, the call came from an ICU. We saw this baby getting in the delivery room, and they saw this ectropion. The call was for ectropion, but because they have a concomitant, this is a colloidal baby. So here you can see the sausage-like skin. Colloidal is a dry sausage. This is a sausage-like skin, and this is a congenital genetic disorder. And here one can see the large dot and blot hemorrhages in the retina in the one eye, and vitreous hemorrhage in the other eye, along with the central portion showing dot hemorrhages in the entire retina. So entire retina was studied, and we were able to capture it. The ROP babies referrals, they tend to come at around 20 to 30 days of life. This just came within 1 hour of life, and we dilated the patient in the second hour itself. We were able to capture. So if one has a handy tool, really becomes easy for us to document the pathology. The baby, however, did not survive. Parents are also not really keen on making the baby survive. Now, this is one of my favorite case, and I like to write stories also, like Dr. Sharad Thakur does. Written a interesting story on this chorioretinal coloboma. But again, this is a 20-year-old neonate in which we were able to capture a montage from the lower periphery to the extreme periphery onto the top. There are some tricky situations when the babies are under all CPAP and ventilator, and again, those are really tricky cases. But we are sometimes able to capture not so clean. Yet there is a vitreous edge, so the clarity is not so good. But again, such tricky cases are also possible. Or sometimes when there is a nystagmus, as we know in pediatric retina, when the retina doesn't develop, the eye tends to undergo nystagmus, and the vision, the eye keeps on roving, but yet with gentle coaxing and slight, toggling of the entire smartphone, we can be able to capture the central fundus as well as the periphery. Here one can see the undeveloped macula in both the patients. Nowadays, I don't use the device. The hand control itself has come so good. So I just, smartphone is always there with us in the pocket. And I bought another 50 megapixel smartphone and Samsung smartphone, and it becomes really easy. The only limitation perhaps of this technique is, of course, we can't do angiography and kind of stuff on this camera, but one has to capture a real, multiple images to obtain a real nice picture. So sometimes it gets frustrating. If one keeps on the video mode and captures, then one can just do post-image processing of the video and capture the entire scenery onto the retina, which the retina has to offer. So that was all for today from my end.
Yeah, thank you, Akash. Very nice slideshows of the excellent pictures. I know a lot of hard work has gone into it. I would like to ask you, what is the learning curve for someone who wants to take up?
So the learning, because the stability of the hand itself is the question. Because even the device, like I said, I don't use the device anymore. Because it really doesn't matter whether you use the device or you don't use the device, and the device can be created free of cost also. So I worked for 6 months between 2016 to 17 after the device came first to me. We tried many maneuvers to stabilize the device and kind of stuff, but especially when it comes to babies. For the adults, we can capture it on slit lamp itself, so it's pretty easy over there. For the pediatric age group, the stability is questioned, so one can just keep a box and stabilize his elbow onto the box, and then try and attempt the smartphone fundus photography. So that helps. But the learning curve is really steep, and if you do it in front of the patient, because the patient's parents are always present in your examination room, then the baby is crying and kind of stuff, so it becomes really tricky. So I would really suggest somebody who's venturing out for the first time to try it out in adults. Use a lot of Paraclean to anesthetize, because again the corneal sensations are a bit tricky to handle, and put a cello tape, the micropore tape onto the back portion of the where the illumination arm is. So that will filter out many of the glare which the patient faces, because you are just focusing the light onto the macula. Yeah. So that becomes
a problem. Yeah.
Yes. So.
And what about the resolution and the field of view you get from these?
So that we can manage. It would be similar to the classical fundus photography that we do. Just that we'll have to ask the patient to shift into various gazes. If it's an adult, then we can opt in until ora serrata also. But the handling of the patient and the cooperation of the patient is of extreme importance. So one has to first explain to the patient what he is doing, because it becomes a bit tricky for the patient to understand what the doctor is doing with a high powered light into his eye. So you already examine the patient. First we'll do indirect ophthalmoscopy. Uske baad ye karte hai, so the patient tend to get irritated.
Yeah, very interesting, and especially those pediatric eyes images is very commendable. Dr. Akash, thank you for the nice presentation. Can you stop sharing? Yeah. Now I invite our next VR surgeon, Dr. Harsh Yadav, to present his series of cases. He is a VR surgeon for past 6 or 7 years, I think, in Gurukul Hospital in Rajkot, doing high volume work. Now we would like to hear from him what he has to show.
Hello, good evening, sir. Should I share my?
Yes, please share the screen.
Yes.
Meanwhile, any comment from Dr. Mehta for smartphone photography of the previous speaker? Mute, sir. You are mute. Yes.
No, I have no experience, but the I think the advantages are a lot for pediatric cases, as he said, for ROP children. Because who will otherwise have red cam? That's all. We will need a red cam, but at least this is doing a good job.
Great. Good. Yes.
So the only limitation is less than 4 kilometers, we can we can capture. So if the patient has blood pressure and the people is really narrow, that is where we want to really accept the patient that there is a problem behind the child.
Right. Yes, Dr. Harsh Yadav.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Should I start, sir?
Yeah, please start.
Thank you, Purval sir, and for giving the opportunity. I am going to present.
It is an echo. It is the second device. So Harsh, then you like to stop.
Hello? Should I start first?
Mukesh sir, any nearby dual device can create the
Go ahead, Dr. Harsh.
Yes, sir. I am going to present the test cases of subhilar hemorrhage. A 16 years old weakness of vision of sudden onset. On fundus foot, there was a large circular subhilar of approximately 5 millimeter, and his left eye was normal. Basically, this is a Valsalva maneuver.
Just a minute, Dr. Harsh. Is there another device near your primary device? We are getting an echo, probably from your end.
Sir, is there surrounding? Is it okay?
I think everyone else other than us sir should mute their video, sir. Mute their. Then I don't think there will be an echo, sir.
Yeah, audio, I suppose.
The audio should be muted.
Yeah, go ahead, Harsh.
Yeah. OCT was showing high reflectance dome-shaped retrohilar blood accumulation, and it is masking the structure posteriorly. That patient was treated with NDR, and we can see that the of blood in the vitreous cavity.
Mr. Vidyut, please help.
Yes, sir, you unmute.
Yeah. Can you speak? Dr. Harsh? There seems to be some connectivity problem.
Yes, I think someone is joined with two devices. or due to low bandwidth echo is coming.
But we are not able to hear. He is muted. I think.
Hello.
Yes. Can you carry on?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm studying my music. Sir, I think.
You'll have to reshare.
Yes, I'm sharing my.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Yeah. I'm presenting with another case of 50-year-old male patient. Presented with sudden
Could you please rejoin again?
his visual acuity was
Your internet issue, the inputs are coming.
in his right eye. Other there are no any changes of his patient has history of diabetes. We are suspecting the damage due to breakdown of nucleus. Again, that patient was and blood in the vitreous we can see after the hyalotomy, and the patient improves the visual acuity of 6/9 at the interval of 2 months. One interesting case is of 55 years old male presented with dimness of vision in both eyes since 1 month. His right eye visual acuity was around 618 and left eye visual acuity was 624. There was a subhyaloid hemorrhage superior to the macula and some sort of neovascularization C adjacent to the subhyaloid hemorrhage. We can see the sclerosed vessel temporal to the macula. The patient underwent angiography. Angiography was showing hyperfluorescent area suggestive of active leakage, and some block fluorescent corresponds to the subhyaloid hemorrhage. There are large area of capillary non-perfusion seen in the temporal and the peripheral retina. OCT was showing diffuse macular edema in the right eye. That patient was treated accordingly the condition of the diabetic retinopathy, and it was treated with anti-VEGF along with pan-retinal photocoagulation. Case number 4, a 17 years old male patient presented with dimness of vision in both eyes since 6 days. Patient is a non-case of megaloblastic anemia of nutritional variety. He has already consulted to oncophysician and patient has started treatment with oncophysician. On a fundus photograph, we can see approximately a 1.5 disc diameter area of subhyaloid hemorrhage in his right eye and around 1 disc diameter area of subhyaloid hemorrhage in his left eye. OCT picture was showing the pockets of blood just adjacent to the fovea, but we can see fovea very well in both the cases, both the eyes, because the amount of the blood is not that much high, and the patient was treated conservatively. Similar cases, a 56-year-old female patient presented with dimness of vision in her right eye since a few days. That patient has a history of hypertension and diabetes. On fundus photograph, we can see there is a large macroaneurysm just in the temporal arcade, and approximately 5 disc diameter area of subhyaloid hemorrhage was seen. This patient treated with subhyaloid hemorrhage with hyalotomy, and macroaneurysm with treated with focal laser. But unfortunately, after 2 weeks follow-up, the blood was not dissolved. So the patient underwent vitrectomy for subhyaloid hemorrhage, and patient was reviewed at 1 month. Her visual acuity was improved to 6/9. So take-home message for those premacular or extramacular subhyaloid hemorrhage cases is ND-YAG laser hyaloidectomy is an inexpensive, effective, and safe outpatient procedure for premacular subhyaloid hemorrhage, producing rapid drainage with restoration of visual function. But for doing YAG hyaloidectomy, the diameter of the subhyaloid hemorrhage should be more than 3 disc diameter. Conditions in which the subhyaloid hemorrhage is not involving the macula should be treated accordingly. Underlying disease. Vitrectomy is required in cases where the blood is not displaced from the macula. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, nice collection of subhyaloid hemorrhage cases, Dr. Harsh.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you said subhyaloid hemorrhages are this YAG hyaloidectomy is a safe option.
Yes,
but
sir.
for maintaining the safety, you'll need to follow some protocols. Can you highlight a little bit about the power and the focus? How do you achieve for a perfect YAG hyaloidectomy for the pre-retinal or subhyaloid hemorrhage?
So YAG hyaloidectomy is only advisable in those cases when there is an obstruction of the macula. Premacular subhyaloid hemorrhage is there. If the subhyaloid hemorrhage is away from the macula and not obstruction the macula,
yeah, I understand. But how do you focus exactly on the hyaloid membrane to achieve the effect?
Yes, sir. I usually do YAG hyaloidectomy with Menster focal laser lens. Right? So there are two red spots which we have to get concentrated on the posterior surface of the hyaloid, and we have to start giving start shooting. I think more than 10-15 shots are required to get the puncture. All the shots should be on the similar basis because it requires a bit higher energy, approximately 4 minutes.
If it is focused on the most boggy area of the blood, and a few shots, I think 2 or 3 shots, even a single shot can sometimes do the trick if it is well focused and of adequate energy. Have you had any injury to the underlying retina by your YAG laser shots?
Sir, usually those cases where more than 3 disc diameter hemorrhage is there and that amount of the blood is higher. In these cases, I usually prefer YAG hyaloidectomy. Otherwise, after it sometimes it may leads to development of macular hole or choroidal neovascularization from the punctured retina, and the development of epiretinal membrane is even higher in those cases if we injure the retina after doing YAG hyaloidectomy.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Harsh. We now move on to the next presentation by Dr. Rajan Mehta. He is working the Ramakrishna Trust Hospital as a vitreoretinal surgeon for the past many years, and we'd like to see his series of cases. Please share your screen, Dr. Rajan.
Yes. So is it visible and audible, sir?
Yes, everything fine. Please go ahead.
Yeah, at the outset, I would like to thank Rajkot Ophthalmic Society and Mukesh sir for providing this opportunity to present, and of course the Novartis for sponsoring. I will be briefly talking about retinal occlusive vasculopathies that we see commonly in day-to-day practice. Just briefly touching the clinical aspect, not going into the theoretical ones. Now, if you see such kind of fundus picture, a patient presenting usually have a unilateral diminution of vision in more than 90% of the cases with a mean age of around 65 years. And visual acuity would be generally less than 660, that we're counting fingers. And there will be RAPD as well. If you see the fundus, there will be a lot of hemorrhages, intraretinal hemorrhages in all 4 quadrants of the eye, as well as there will be tortuous and dilated veins with central dense scotoma as well, with mild optic disc swelling. You may get cotton wool spots as well. Invariably, such would be CRVO is known as ischemic CRVO, and then would be associated with central central macular edema. There would be substantial thickening of the retina with cystic changes, which Eventually, with the commencement of treatment with anti-VEGF or intravitreal steroid implants, gradually there will be reduction in the edema aspect as well as the hemorrhages over the period of time. Retinal vein occlusion. This is also known as non-ischemic or perfuse type of CRVO, wherein if you compare to the ischemic one, there will be less of hemorrhages in all four quadrants. Veins are not that much dilated and tortured. Usually more than 6/60 RAPD as well. And they respond very well to the treatment, and as well as anatomical and functional outcomes are really good as compared to the ischemic one. Now, diabetes and hypertension are the most common association with CRVOs. You need to do the workup accordingly, as well as hypovitaminosis, B12, and hypolipidemias are also found to have been risk factors for the CRVOs. Patients, especially young patients, the incidence of CRVO in the young is 15%, less than 45 years of age, in which one must think of inflammatory causes as the causative factor. And for that, we need to do complete blood profile as well as serum homocysteine. And especially females who are on oral contraceptives, they tend to have more chances of getting occlusions. Now, another variety of venous occlusion is the branch retinal vein occlusion. The clinical picture we see here is the hemorrhages are specified or located to that particular quadrant of the vein draining that area. 60% of the cases we find as superiotemporal arcade, superiotemporal branch of the vein which is occluded, and invariably we have macular edema associated with it, which eventually gets reduced after the treatment with anti-VEGF. 30% of the cases may also involve the inferotemporal quadrant or inferotemporal branch, which gradually reduces with the treatment. And nasal BRVOs are usually asymptomatic. You generally detect accidentally. Now, one of the variant of branch retinal vein occlusion is whenever there is a macular twig of the branch retinal vein is occluded, you see the hemorrhage is specially localized to that particular quadrant only and never cross the arcade. Of course, it is cystoid macular edema is the common cause for decreased visual acuity, which reduces with the treatment. However, they are also notorious for being recurrent, and one may need to top up with focal laser if there is a recurrence, along with the anti-VEGFs. Here, the 75% hypertension is related or associated with branch retinal vein occlusion. That is.
I would request Dr. Ruchi to mute the mic, please. Some voice noise is coming from her. Sorry to interrupt. Please
similar to the central retinal vein occlusion, the hyperlipidemias and the cardiovascular profiles need to be investigated, as well as hyperhomocysteinemia. If you see such kind of picture, there is a central opaque retina and generally mild attenuation of the arteries. The patient presents usually with unilateral sudden painless diminution of vision. Visual acuity is usually PLPR, and there will be a lot of central edema because of the nerve fiber layer and the ganglion cell layer are thickest at the posterior pole as compared to the periphery, as well as you will find cherry red spot because of the intact choroidal vasculature in contrast to the opaque retina. It will be highlighted more. And if you happen to pass an OCT, it will not require, or it's not compulsory, but it's just for the documentation. There will be very much thickening of the inner retinal layers because of the edema and the acute coagular necrosis, and the inner retinal layer is completely infarcted. And the studies in the primate have shown that if the retina gets infarcted for 90 to 100 minutes, there will be irreversible loss of vision. the prognosis is very poor. This is another case showing the central retinal vein occlusion. Similarly, the inner layer edema. Eventually after a few times it will reperfuse and you will see a featureless or normal fundus. However, OCT will be able to tell us there will be loss of inner retinal layers and intact outer retinal layers, which further may tell you the previous diagnosis of retinal artery occlusion. And diabetes and hypertension are again common association, but the most common cause is emboli. That is, around 80% of the cases are due to atherosclerosis of the carotid arteries, and of course the disease cardiac valves. So you need to liaise with a physician and need to discuss with this and find out the cause of it, because it is related to the mortality as well. Around 12% of mortality, especially in young CRVOs, are due to the vascular pathologies or disorders. And the physician liaison is must to have better control over the system, take care of the systemic aspect, of course. And the regular follow-up is necessary because they are prone for the neovascularization, and you may end up in the vitreous hemorrhage or the tractional retinal detachment. The patient may come at the late stage. That's it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rajan Mehta. Nice collection of all vascular occlusions. Give us the overall picture. Yeah, we appreciate that. Just a quick point. We see a lot of central retinal vein occlusion, CRVO cases, being worked up extensively, systemically. What is your opinion and experience? Do they lead to any particular systemic disease or findings in many of them?
Yes, even I have found that
old age CRVOs, typically, not the young ones.
Yes, I found even though almost all the CRVOs are associated with carotid artery thrombosis and stenosis, but many of the CRVOs. Right. But I have also found that many of the CRVOs are also associated with similar thrombosis as well. Not that commonly associated.
When they are combined occlusions, I can understand. Artery and vein ophthalmic artery occlusion. Right. Yeah, interesting collection of cases. You've shown them all. Nice work. Now we would like to move on to the next presenter, Dr. Dhruv Vora. Please stop sharing. Dr. Dhruv can start sharing. Dr. Dhruv Vora is a dynamic young VR surgeon, having completed his fellowship from Shankar Nethralaya and now working with Bedre Eye Center and doing great work. Dr. Dhruv, you can start, please. You're mute.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yeah, now you're audible. Yes.
So thank you, Dr. Porwal and Team ROS and Novartis for providing us this opportunity to meet online. I'll be sharing a few cases with a few messages as I was advised by Dr. Porwal. So this 70-year-old gentleman, actually a family friend of one of my MBBS batchmates, he came to me with a complaint of decreased vision in one of the eyes and insisting that only say left eye has poor vision and I'll be dilating only one eye and you did not see other eye because that vision is pretty good. So once I dilated and I saw this great big front of neovascular vessels on the disc, and I started asking him regarding the duration of diabetes and what all drugs and all he was taking. And he insisted time and again that I do not have diabetes, I'm only a hypertensive patient and I do not have diabetes. So he wanted to actually see the problem that was happening. So I did a montage photograph, highlighted this neovascular front at the disc, insisting again that he should get a diabetic workup done, and also had this OCTA taken, which was a great big front over the disc looking like a marigold flower that was there. And he was not pretty convinced regarding the diabetes. So again, it led to further questions, and he showed me a thick file of investigations which he had. Suddenly, I just glanced at my chart and saw the IOP to be 8 mmHg in this eye with a huge neovascularization. That got me ticking. And as and when I viewed through his thick file, I found him to already have undergone a carotid a bypass and a carotid Doppler showing a complete occlusion. And also the other eye, which I after insisted him on dilating, showed no evidence of DR. Thus, diagnosis of an ocular ischemic syndrome was made, and he underwent laser in the right eye, which beautifully the red-free image shows regression of the new vascularization on the disc 2 weeks after PRP. Even the OCT angio shows good resolution of the vessels that have started. So the thing, the flowery NVD, which I was comparing it to a marigold flower, did actually turn out to be in the end a medusa, considering the poor visual outcome that he would be having. So the take-home messages from this case: not all NVDs are due to proliferative diabetic retinopathy, especially if unilateral or asymmetric. In elderly, do get a carotid Doppler done and do rule out any other causes like an RVO or a sickle cell or something else. This is the second case which I label as vanishing exudates, since it had a very good outcome. This gentleman, middle-aged gentleman from Dhaka, actually was coming for a routine follow-up with his diabetologist in Rajkot, who referred me for his workup because of poor vision. He had PDR in both the eyes. This is the left eye in which intravitreal steroids were injected, considering the subretinal fluid at the fovea, the sciatic edema, and the hard exudates at the fovea, and we got a pretty great response. Also, we note these hyperrefractive dots and the intact ELM, which are pretty good biomarkers to say that he will respond to steroids and will have a good visual acuity. This is the other eye. So the biomarkers like an intact ELM do help in telling that patient that you might have a good prognosis, and do consider intravitreal steroids in patients who have perifoveal hard exudates. This is another 40-year-old female who came with periorbital pain and was thought to have optic neuritis in both the eyes, considering the so-called disc edema, and was given IVMP, but that did not resolve her pain at all. She had come for a second opinion, and on further examination, we can see no obvious opacification of the peripapillary NFL, and also the small ovoid bodies that you see in both the discs, which did turn out to be optic nerve head drusen, which are pretty well made out on this disc autofluorescence, and also clearly seen on this B scan that is there below. The OCT of the same showing a good collection of numerous buried optic nerve head drusen in the both eyes optic nerve heads that was seen. This is similar another case showing buried optic nerve head drusen in both the eyes, left eye of which is more prominent. Obviously, we need to consider other diagnoses like an anterior ischemic artery occlusion, which might have a disc at risk or a very small disc with an absent cup, and obvious papillar edema changes that you can see in the lower picture. So if the patient is asymptomatic, has good vision, no obvious other associated signs of raised ICT, peripapillary hemorrhages, and a lumpy bumpy margin of the optic disc, one needs to rule out an optic nerve head drusen, which may be buried and not easily visible. These are a series of 3 cases of VKH disease which I would like to present. This is a young female who was working as a house help in one of my friend's places. She did have this exudative detachments, which on treatment with IVMP, steroids, and immunomodulators, in the end, after a year or so, did turn out to have this typical sunset red glow, which is seen in chronic cases of VKH. One thing I would like you all to notice is this RP waviness or undulations that we see, and a thickened choroid which resolves after IVMP. This is the right eye and left eye, which is much more classic. These are very commonly seen in patients with choroiditis, especially VKH. And this choroidal thickness almost resolves to near normal once they get treated appropriately. This is another case, again, patient who was given IVMP for this so-called disc edema because of optic neuritis. The other eye was totally normal. Again, it's a unilateral presentation, but I think what was missed was this lobulated fluid-like thing, which you can easily make out on the red-free image of the right eye. And the FFA did obviously have classical pinpoint leaks which lead to subretinal dye pooling, which is classic of FFA. In this case, OCT did show this subretinal septae, which again are more obviously seen in VKH, which do resolve with IVMP. This is a third case with a milder exudative detachments. Again, the FFA showing pinpoint leaks, which pool in the late stage classic of FFA, and something known as the bacillary layer detachment, which was published by the EPGI group, is very obviously seen. The supraseptate fluid that you can see above the arrow has much more signal density than the infraseptate fluid. So all these three cases of RP undulation, the subretinal septae and the bacillary detachment on OCT, especially the swept source, which gives you a great view into the choroid 2, are classic of VKH, and FFA is obviously needed, is still the gold standard, but these do point towards VKH. One should not confuse this subretinal septae like in this case with a classic CSR case, in along with which you have a serous PED, and this hyperintensity that you see in subretinal fluid is just some fibrin that's there. Again, another case in which this subretinal fibrin is there and it's not a septae, and these are just shaggy or elongated photoreceptors in a healing CSR case. So the classic points, as I already mentioned, and obviously the differential diagnosis is a CSR or a multifocal CSR. Lastly, one should not, CSR is usually a spot diagnosis. Even undilated, if you see on the fovea, you find this lobule of SRF that's sitting there, but it's very imperative not to dilate and not to miss these cases and have a look at the disc, especially in which you have these optic nerve head pits, which you can miss and confuse as CSR. Especially in this case on the autofluorescence, you can see that the fluid is not only at the macula, but along the papillomacular bundle going towards the optic nerve head pit, or rather emanating from the optic nerve head pit. And the classic OCT findings of the optic nerve head pit, including the inner layer, the outer layer chysis, and the subretinal fluid, although it might just be a collection of SRF. So in a case of CSR, always do look at the disc. As they say, don't let the disc be in your blind spot. Thank you. This was all from my side, and just a collection of few other images. Thanks a lot.
Nice collection of varied diagnosis and images, Dr. Dhruv. Yes, very interesting. And you had VKH there, CSR, you had NVD, and optic dystrophin. So a lot of it going at the same time. And I would have loved to see the post-treatment pictures of the VKH of some of your cases with steroids or whatever you had used. What is the general treatment protocol you follow for VKH diagnosis and treatment? Yes, it's there. Nice. So I'd like you to highlight that the difference is dramatic once the VKH is treated. So it almost comes back to normal very soon with IVMP or even sometimes oral systemic steroids. You're mute, Dhruv.
Yeah, considering the amount of the presentation, the thickness of the choroid, and the FFA findings, I do start them mostly on IVMP unless and until they've already been partly treated and there is very minimal fluid and minimal choroidal thickness. And then I proceed with high dose steroids tapering about 10 mg per week, starting from 1 to 1.2 kg per body weight. I also do like to start them simultaneously on azathioprine as the triple therapy, they say, which I continue at least for 6 months to a year, even after the symptoms disappear, if the patient can tolerate.
Recurrence, yeah, that is right. Nice collection of cases, Dr. Dhruv. And for want of time, we would now move on to our last presentation, Dr. Vark Karia, who has joined us recently, joined Rajkot group of retina surgeons. And we'd like to hear from him what he has to show us, his images and cases.
Thank you so much, sir. I would just like to highlight one single case rather than the number of cases that all the previous presenters have shown. Is my slide visible, sir?
Yes, visible. Please go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. My topic for today would be CME in a case of diabetic patient, a holistic approach to treatment. Uh, the case is of a 55-year-old female who presented to us with for just a routine annual retina checkup. She was a known case of diabetes mellitus since last 12 years, and it was well controlled. She did not have any other significant systemic history. On examination, the anterior segment examination was showed NS1 cataract. The rest of anterior segment was within normal limits. The fundus examination showed a moderate NPDR with a few cystic spaces at the fovea and minimal non-center involving DME. However, the BCVA in both the eyes was 6 parts. This is the OCT of the with the line scan passing through the fovea. You can see a few cystic spaces in both the eyes at the level of the fovea. However, the vision was 6/6, so this is the multicolor image. The multicolor image, as you can see here, shows a lot of yellowish flecked appearance at the fovea and around the fovea through involving the macular region. This was more in the left eye as compared to in the right eye. On seeing the autofluorescence image, you can see here there are multiple hypoautofluorescent areas with surrounding hyperautofluorescence, especially in the left eye. This is especially important to show about the health of the RPE in the macular region. We advise the patient to continue Nepafinac eye drops and systemic DM control, and according to the protocol, we advise the patient to come after 3 months. However, patient presented to us just 10 days later with complaints of blurring of vision. Her vision had dropped from 6/6 parts to 6/18 in the right eye and 6/18 parts in the left eye. You can see cystoid macular edema appearing in both the eyes with a lot of skytic fluid also. The multicolor image, as you can see, shows a lot of cystoid spaces, especially at the fovea in the right as well as in the left eye. On further exam, in asking the history, the patients had actually come for a family wedding to the city. Patient had a very poor control of DM in the last 1 week. She had a lot of sweet food. She was not regular with her medications and all. We decided to do the RBS, and it was 265. We asked the patient to come with the full blood reports and to start regular treatment and to review back with us. The reason why we did not decide to intervene here is that because 10 days back the patient had totally normal vision. Also in the autofluorescence image, it showed the RPE was not healthy in both the eyes. So it could have been that the sugar control which was lost in the last few days could have led to this cystoid swelling appearing. So on day 18, the patient presented to us with all the blood reports. The parameters were well under control. The renal function tests were also advised and they were under control. She was started on regular DM medication. This you can see here, the vision improved, the cystoid edema decreased, and the BCVA was regained partly in 6/9 parts in both the eyes. You can see here that the yellowish flecks are still seen here in the multicolor image, and the hypoautofluorescent spots with the surrounding hyperautofluorescence ring is clearly seen. To summarize the case, we can see here how the case evolved from a normal, almost a normal looking fovea to a cystoid edema because of no lack of DM control, and with the proper systemic control and without any intervention from our side, the patient had regained her vision. This was also the case in the left eye as well. The take-home message is diabetes mellitus is a multi-organ system disease. Diabetic retinopathy is just an offshoot of a poor systemic DM control. Regular screening and imaging is an essential part of DR management. The reason, the fact that we did an OCT and a multimodal imaging of that patient, even though her vision was 6/6, helped us to not intervene quickly, jump into the case and to inject intravitreals. Rather, we decided to wait, and that worked out well for the patient as well as for us. Multimodal imaging is the way to go forward, as a lot of presenters before me have already highlighted. Coordination between the patient, physician, and the ophthalmologist is the key, because it is a multi-system involvement. We have to be aware of what the other part of the treatment is going on. Last but not the least, in the era of EMR, sitting with the patient for a few extra minutes and taking a proper history can save time and cost for both the patient as well as the treating doctor. I thank ROS and Dr. Purwal sir for providing me with this opportunity.
Excellent presentation, Dr. Bhatt. Very crisp and very focused. Yeah, and the take-home message obviously is very clear that systemic control and systemic workup is utmost importance in these cases. Yes. And how routinely do you see patients who respond to systemic control when they present with diabetic macular edema? I presume this
A lot.
imaging is from your fellowship days.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It was from when I did my fellowship in Chennai, sir. So we used to we used to do that for a lot of patients, sir. What we find is that even though the treatment, the macular edema might not subside as much with just the control of systemic diabetes, but it helps when you give anti-VEGF. If the systemic control is not going to be there, the patient will progress. And that will obviously affect the adherence and compliance of the patient to the treatment as well. So just making the patient aware that this is also the reason why you are not getting the treatment that the response that you might if you get a good DM control.
Right. And how long would you like to wait for a patient who is not in control and having a lot of DME to go ahead with the treatment?
If this patient, we would have preferred to wait for this for about 3 weeks, sir. And after 3 weeks, if the CME still had not resolved and her flight also because she had this problem. So within a week, if within 2 weeks, if it had not resolved, then we would definitely have preferred to treat her.
Right, I understand. Nice presentation. There we come to the end of all the presentations. You have not overshot the time by much, so that is a good thing. And I would like to have a few comments from Dr. Hitendra Mehta, who has patiently sat with us, listened to all our presentations, and few words from you before I announce the.
On the last case, the only thing I felt was that, normally we don't see such dramatic response in, 7 days, via systemic control. It's, I mean, it's not very common what he just saw, because from almost a flat macula to gross CME and then flat macula all in 88 days. So it was a little, not a very common occurrence.
Yeah, that's dramatic.
The fact that it was bilateral and the patient did not have a good sugar control was something that prompted us that maybe we can wait for a week before intervening. Also, the patient being from another country was also the reason why we did not want to start the treatment early and then go.
Right. Yeah, at this stage, I would ask some of our senior ophthalmic surgeons from Rajkot, if Dr. Manoj Bhatt or Dr. Sanjay Gadre sir can put in a word or comment regarding this webinar, if they are there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Can
Yes,
you
sir.
hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh yeah. It was excellent actually. Very good. And all the ophthalmologists who presented, I
Right.
joined a little late. I'm sorry I missed Hitendra's presentation, but I think this will be on YouTube, so I'll
Yes.
catch up with that. But all our presenters from Rajkot really showed wonderful cases. They spoke well. The documentation was very good, and I'm really very happy that everybody is doing good work. And I
Right.
must thank you, congratulate you for assembling all of them, forcing them to collect cases and show them. I think it could be a monthly feature of ROS. And congrats for that.
Thank you, sir. And
Thank you.
the only thing is, I could not give them a lot of time, but they did full justice with the limited time provided to them.
Yeah. The
That is-
messages were very clearly conveyed. Yes.
Yes.
And a very ethical approach to every patient was also, demonstrated. Yeah. It was very good, actually.
We appreciate your comments, sir. Dr. Manoj Bhatt, sir, 1 or 2 minutes, you can say something. I think is he there? Thank you. Okay, as we come to the end of this webinar, it's a very challenging job to choose the winner actually. Out of these varied presentation, all of them pretty good, some of them excellent. But for the sheer efforts, hard work, and the time spent in doing the job, I would award the prize to Dr. Akash Patel for his painstaking work for documenting the photographs of pediatric retinas, especially. I know there can be many winners, but we'll have to select one out of these. And the prize today goes to Dr. Akash Patel. Obviously, in the next or the other webinars, somebody else will come forward. Thank you, Dr. Akash. You will get a voucher shortly. And thank you all for spending the Saturday evening watching this webinar. I hope it was interesting. You can tell us what next we can choose for our next topic, maybe in December. And that will be the last webinar of this year and last webinar, I hope, of the COVID era. Right. I would like to thank Novartis for taking the interest and setting this all up and supporting us, and all the senior ophthalmologists and the colleagues and juniors who have joined us to watch this. Thank you one and all. See you next time. Probably last Saturday of December, December 26th. We'll have our last one.
Thank you, Purval sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Hitler Mehta, sir.
Thank you. Bye.
I really dedicate this prize to all the patients. You know, it is a new technique, and it is not so conventional. So even the patients feel slightly intimidated, and especially with the kids, the precious children. They consecrate to us, and then we try to sort of sing in a private practice. It's surely
it's not easy. It's very painstaking, and once you master it, you can do it everywhere. That's the big advantage.
Yes.
So that's.
I feel everybody of us should give it a shot, and it's really handy. One just needs routine 20D and a routine smartphone, and just orient it to and then.
Yeah, and you should take tutorials for the new learners. So send somebody to you, right? Especially my fellows or somebody who is interested in doing. Okay. Right. Here we end the webinar. Have a nice evening. Thank you, Dr. Hitendra Mehta, sir. I tried to contact you on phone, but somehow it was not working. Yeah. Right. And we hope to see you next time somewhere.
Sure.
Right.
Okay. Bye. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, doctors. Thank you.
All doctors. Thank you, Novartis.
Thank you, sir. Purval sir, thanks for arranging a very nice event.
Thank you so much for setting all this up. There were some audio and video issues for some of us, but I think we can't help it Saturday evening. The bandwidth will always be a problem. With hundreds of webinars going around, I think.
Yes, sir.
Right.
But really thankful to you for setting a tone for this ROS, sir. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah.